Let's take a few moments to continue studying the native hickories to the Ohio Valley, Lower Great Lakes, and Appalachian areas. Most of the range maps don't show this particular type of hickory growing much into the Lower Great Lakes, but probably in a few places. But it's common in the central and southern Appalachians, and even common in southern New England on the drier soils. So some hickories can grow in swamps, and do grow in swamps, like the shellbark. And the shagbark we often find in swamps around here. This is in Warren County, Ohio, but also on the well-drained soil. So it can grow in a lot of habitats. What I'm going to study today is the Pignut hickory, which is sharing this beech maple forest here at the Fort Ancient State Memorial in Warren County, Ohio. I've done many of my video clips here. We've got some really nice mature woods, nice big plots, not just a few trees, but 20, 30, 50, 100 acres at a time. So here's a mature Pignut hickory with some furrowed bark that kind of converges. The furrows converge with these little ridge tops at a pretty gentle angle. It's not too much of an angle where the two meet. One tree that could easily be confused with the Pignut hickory is the Mockernut hickory. The bark is the same color, which is an olive gray. It's the same shade as you would find on the shagbark and shellbarks, and quite a bit darker than the bitternut hickory. Bitternut hickory is a softer shade of tan, and this is more of the olive gray that you'd find on the other hickories. But these ridges come together at a pretty gentle angle. And if you were to look at a Mockernut hickory, it has the same color bark, but the ridges often come together with a more abrupt or steep angle. Instead of being 5 or 10 degrees, it can be up to 30 degrees. So that's one way to tell them apart, because the bark is the same color and it looks almost the same. They both grow in well-drained soils, like what we have here, not in the swamp forests. Let's look at the buds and the nuts, because I'm hiking in the winter a lot. The leaves are either not out, or in these mature forests, they're way, way up there. You can't see them. So what kind of hickory is this without getting the leaves involved? Mother Nature has blown a lot of the leaf cover away, and I found hundreds of these Pignut hickory nuts on the ground here to study. So I can tell it's a Pignut hickory just by the nuts alone. The nuts have a very thin husk. It's not even 1/8 of an inch thick. The Mockernut on your right here has a much thicker husk, probably 1/4 inch thick. And just for comparison, the shagbark has a husk that's a 1/2 inch thick. You wouldn't confuse the shagbark with these two trees, the Mockernut or the Pignut, but just for comparison. The buds on the Mockernut are much larger than the buds on the Pignut. They're got to be at least 3/8 to a 1/2 inch wide. And the bud on this Pignut here is only maybe 1/8 to a 1/4 inch wide. And honestly, I think the thickness of the husk is about the same as the width of the bud. And I think we could do likewise with the husk of that Mockernut is about the same thickness as the bud. So Mockernuts have thicker stems or stalks, and a much larger bud. And the Pignut has a much smaller bud and a thinner shell, and also a fairly small nut compared to the Mockernut. Mockernuts are 1.5 to 2 inch wide nuts. Pignuts can get to be 2 inches, but usually they're more in the 1 inch range, and they're often shaped like pears or teardrops. So that's one way to tell these two very closely related trees apart without the assistance of leaves. And I will get to the leaves on these plants during the next growing season, but the Pignut does only have 5 leaflets, and the Mockernut has 7 to 9 leaflets. So if you can see the leaves, that's one way to tell them apart. But often, if you're doing hikes in these parks, these trees are large and they're tall, and you really can't see much more than the bark any time of year. So this is a good way to tell them apart. Just start poking around on the ground and looking for the nuts, and that'll help you tell two trees apart that are hard to distinguish otherwise.